up here, the name of this document is Ordinatio Sacerdotalis. Okay. A document that John Paul II wrote in 1993. Most papal documents, most of them are like 100 pages. This one is 4 pages. It's short for a reason. And he says in there basically this: the one single solo fundamental reason the Church doesn't ordain women is this: Jesus chose 12 men. And he says in there very quickly, the Church does not have the authority to deviate from that. We have a bunch of theological arguments about why Jesus may have done that. Why he may have done that. But it's important to understand that these theological arguments that people have put forward through the centuries about why Jesus may have done that is not the same as the fundamental reason. People always want to fight those. Well, that's stupid. That's a stupid reason that Jesus would have done that. That doesn't make any sense. Okay, well, if you don't like it, then that's your opinion or whatever. Okay? But you're not actually arguing. No one argues with this. Jesus only chose men to be apostles. This is not ever fought over. What is fought over is this: people's guesses, and even the Church's guesses, or best guesses, as to why Jesus may have done that. The first objection, and you write that one in, the Church denies women equal opportunity and rights based on a stereotype that is outdated. So reply number 1 to that argument, or no one, men included, has a right to be ordained. Who decides what men to ordain? The bishop. Can I show up at the bishop's door and say, since I'm a man, you must ordain me? I mean, I can, but he's going to say, yeah, and you're crazy. A lot of times, ordination is viewed as this thing that women have to win because it's the symbol of rights. It's a right that the Church is denying women. But the thing that's important to realize is that men do not have a right to be ordained either. So talking about this as a rights issue doesn't make any sense, really. What is the main reason that people put forward as to why Jesus would not have chosen a woman at the time? The main argument, basically, for women's ordination is this: that Jesus was afraid of the way the culture viewed women at the time, so he didn't make any women apostles. Because if the apostles are going to go out and preach and spread the good news of Jesus, then people aren't going to listen to women. Okay? And in fact, the argument is made that a woman's testimony was not accepted in court back then, so a woman could not have been an apostle and an effective spreader of the good news. If you read the Gospels, Jesus, at every turn, upsets the established order. He is, in every sense of the word, rebellious. There is nothing. What is the most sacred teaching of the Jews, perhaps, that Jesus violates all the time? Working on the Sabbath. The Sabbath day was considered extremely holy. Jesus is always doing what to them? He's doing what they would consider work. He's upsetting the established order. Some people say that because a woman's testimony was not accepted in court, Jesus would not have ordained a woman as one of the apostles. But Jesus was not putting together a legal defense team of people who were going to work through the courts. Okay? Otherwise, he wouldn't have picked fishermen to be the people that were going to do the work for him. He would have gotten lawyers and people who would have been good in the courts. It says in the Bible, he chose the weak to shame the strong. Now, objection 2, the Church's decision is based on a wrong understanding of the differences between men and women. the decision wasn't one that the church makes. Christ made the decision. So if you're going to say that someone had a wrong understanding of the differences between men and women, you'd have to say that that was Christ, and that is kind of ridiculous if you really believe Jesus is who the church believes Jesus is. Objection 3, if you can be baptized, you should be able to be ordained. Does being ordained a priest have any impact? Does it mean that one person is now more likely to go to heaven than the other person who's not ordained? Absolutely not. Let's read 1 Corinthians 12:4. There are different kinds of spiritual gifts, but the same Spirit. There are different forms of service, but the same Lord. To each individual, the manifestation of the Spirit is given for some benefit. This is important. To one is given through the Spirit wisdom. To another, knowledge according to the same Spirit. To another, faith. To another, gifts of healing. To another, mighty deeds. To another, prophecy. To another, discernment of spirits. To another, interpretation of tongues. But one and the same Spirit produces all of these, distributing them individually to each person as the Spirit wishes. The body is not a single part, but many. If a foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it does not for this reason belong any less to the body. If Jonathan Ferris's hand is mad at the foot because the hand cannot be a foot, the hand can't just say, well, I'm not a part of Jonathan anymore. Okay, it is a part of Jonathan. The hand plays a role in Jonathan just like the foot does. Different roles? Yes. More important or less important? No. Okay? You need the hand, you need the foot. Okay? It's the same thing in the sense that people do not say to themselves, well, since I don't get to play priest, that's not fair. Okay? It is a role within the body of Christ. And that passage from Corinthians is a reminder to not protest the thing that I don't get to do. This is an important quote. This is John Paul II quotes this in that letter, Ordinatio Sacerdotalis, that we looked at the beginning. This quote is from there. And it's elsewhere too. It is not the ministers who are the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. It is the saints. You can know a lot about God, but not know God. Pope Benedict has this to say, kind of what we've been talking about. Pope Benedict on power. If I see the church only under the aspect of power, then it follows that everyone who doesn't hold an office is ipso facto oppressed. He also says anyone who turns to the question of power has utterly missed the mystery of the church. Christ said, I come to serve, not to be served. I come to serve, not to be served. If you are, as a priest, coming to be served, if you expect to be served, then you have issues. You have serious problems. Priest stands in the person of Christ. This is the main argument that people put forward for why the church has only traditionally chosen men. Again, remember, that's people's best guess as to why Christ did what he did, right? It's not the fundamental, main, sole reason. When does the priest stand in Persona Christi? At Mass, in the sacraments. If you don't see priesthood as coming from the apostles, which is what the church says, then it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to keep that tradition going. Okay? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense because if they're just ministers, well, yes, of course, women can read the Scriptures just as well as men can and can come up with things to talk about. You know, you watch the women on TV that do the Protestant, services and so forth. They have great stuff. Just as good as any of the guys. Right? Yeah. So you're exactly, I think you're both saying the same thing. I think the reason that people, even Catholics, How many Catholics know what a priest really is supposed to be doing? Not many. Okay, in the mind of the church, the priest is standing as a window to Christ. The priest is standing in the person of Christ. You're supposed to see Christ through the priest in the sacraments. If you do understand this teaching of the church that a priest is supposed to be a sign, a window through to Christ in the sacraments, then it makes a little bit more sense to say that it needs to be a man. Sex is not an arbitrary component of a person. It's not like, oh, well, man or woman, whatever, it doesn't make any difference. Baloney. Makes a lot of difference. Okay, if you're a man or a woman, that makes a lot of difference about a lot of things. Not just physical. It's not just like, oh, God, just, well, why not? I'll make two different kinds. Right? I mean, He had a reason. And it matters. Okay, it must matter then that He made, and it's not just arbitrary differences. Think of the Eucharist. The bread is supposed to function as a sign. It also becomes Christ, the church believes, right? But the bread itself is supposed to be a sign of something. The Eucharist is better signified by bread than it is by Doritos. Where do we hear wheat in the gospel? Yeah, grain of wheat falls to the ground. Adding fire like the Holy Spirit. Water, the water of baptism. All those things play a role. If you had to explain where the Cool Ranch flavor, what that signifies, you'd be hard-pressed to say that Cool Ranch has a sign value for Christ. There are better things to be a sign or a sacrament than others. Okay, it wasn't just like God, again, flipped the coin and was like, let's use unleavened hosts. There it is. Okay, and like on the other option was like licorice, or anything else. No. Okay? There's a reason it was bread. And it is bread, and unleavened bread. Look at this really quickly. Jesus was a Jew with long hair, most likely. Okay, let's just say for a second that he was. And he wears a certain size of shoe. We'll say size 9 sandals. Okay? Should we find only Jewish men with long hair and size 9 sandals? People literally, I'm not kidding, people make that argument. Say, well, if you're going to say that it matters that you're a man, then it also should matter that you have the same shoe size as Jesus or hairstyle, No, those things are not the same. Those things are not the same as one's sex. Okay? One's sex in the mind of the church is a fundamental core thing. Not random, core. Some other objections to the church's teaching really quickly. People say women had big roles in Jesus' group, and of course they did, but only men received the laying on of hands. Some people will say that the resurrected Jesus is no longer male or female, or he transcends sexuality. False. Okay, his body, it wasn't like they were like, oh, who's that amorphous, asexual person? They still recognized it was still Jesus. Our bodies are still going to be, our sex is still going to be a part of us even when we're resurrected. Some people will say, well, there were deaconesses in the early church. There were deaconesses in the early church. Okay, they were not ordained. They were not ordained. They basically fulfilled roles that men could not.